We have a great guest this week, and this was all you. This is all you,
man. We tried it, man. Look, this is literally one of my best friends, one of my favorite people in the world. Yeah, this is. I'm just so excited to have you here. Shout out to my boy Shema Sak Pase.
What up?
What's up, man?
Thanks, Ace.
How you feeling, man?
Still feeling great, man. To be honest with you, I'm really energized. I didn't do my kettlebell workout this morning, but I'm just energized on life right now. I'm hyped.
That's good, man. That's good.
I know you were a part of the functions that were happening around Music Biz Week. What were your takeaways, your highlights from this week?
I came in not really knowing what to expect. You know, when Ace hit me up about it, I think for like 2 weeks I kept asking him like, yo, so like, should I bring a book bag or should I didn't know really what to expect, but it was a super informative. I also saw it was a great opportunity to kind of bridge two worlds that I think sometimes sit at opposite ends of the conversation, which is the business and the function of business. But then Ace wanted to bring a more creative, comprehensive, conversation and dialogue to figure out how to integrate, both worlds. So it was super dope. It was super dope. I'm definitely down to do it.
No,
continue
for sure.
to do it again.
Yeah, I think it's good, like having even having Reach Records represented in those spaces. Like, music. There's the music business is like thriving right now. There's so much growth, money happening. So I think now when that happens, you want good people, integral people to be part of those conversations, making sure that the music business is being held accountable to the standards that reflect fairness and all that good stuff. But yeah, speaking of music business, man, you have like a very extensive resume. We ain't got to get all into it because I think it will take probably the whole episode. But yeah, your connection with music is like very diverse. I mean, hip hop to R&B to pop to Rihanna to Jay-Z to Lecrae to Andy Mineo. Like, talk about how'd you get started in music, bro?
Well, I grew up playing music in church, and that started because I was taking like piano lessons. And when we first started, I think the weekly fee was like $9.75.
Oh, hold on. Oh, that's a week. That's great.
The problem was every week they kept increasing it by like 75 cents. So by the time it got to $14 or $15, my parents was like, yeah, dog, like you're gonna have to start figuring out how to play things on the radio, or you're gonna start playing in church. And so I ended up, spending the week learning how to try to figure out how to play songs that are on the radio, and then playing in church. And then that kind of evolved into me trying to put like a group together, like at the church. And then when I was in middle school, this is when like the music business part came in. Two of my really good friends, they were rappers. And I was like, yo, y'all should like record these songs on a cassette tape. And then they did that, and then I played it on like the school morning news. And by lunchtime, they were like popping. And I was like, yo, y'all should like dub the cassettes and sell them. And then by the end of the week, they started making money. And then that's my first time getting burned in the music business because I didn't make no money off that. You know what I mean? I got burned right then. But that was my first, I didn't know that was music business, that I was doing. And then I eventually, I felt like I was like, compelled to that space. And then I remember like in high school, I wrote this like internship letter on me wanting to work at Def Jam. And crazy. Then I went to Michigan State and I went and tried to become a college campus rep. I actually...
For Def Jam?
For Sony.
For Sony, okay.
And then, so I got the position, but my college roommate took me to a recording studio for the first time. And I think that weekend I called my mom and was like, yo, I'm dropping out of school to go to Full Sail.
Dang.
And her Haitian, as a Haitian immigrant mother would, she thought I was crazy.
Dang, I didn't know. I mean, this is new information to me. I didn't know. Like, tell me, what was your parents' drive to put you in music? Was it your asking or them seeing something in you that made them say, hey, we're going to put you in piano lessons?
They needed a free keyboard player at church.
Yo, shout out all the immigrant.
You know what I mean? That's really, I'm gonna be honest, that's really where it started. It was also too to keep me away from some of the things that were happening around me. Like family that are kind of in the mix of things that they don't want their child to kind of be occupied with.
And this is in Florida.
This is in Florida.
What city?
Fort Lauderdale.
Fort Lauderdale. Yeah. So, and did you have like other cousins that were maybe, or the friends that were maybe around where your parents were like, we want him to go this direction?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I have family that was like in the street, and just the things that are just that are at arm's reach. For things that can distract a kid.
Shout out. I think that's one thing powerful about immigrant parents, just to having to like coming over here, with the little they have, and they're trying to settle, and then the pull of the American culture is strong, and them having the foresight to be like, no, we want to direct you here, so we're gonna do what we can.
I mean, for them, the opportunity to become either a doctor, lawyer, or engineer, which for some reason is the universal occupation for every immigrant in the world.
Those are the only options.
Those are the only three options. I remember being really young and looking through my mom's like nursing books, and at one point, like I was convinced that like, I'm gonna probably have to be a doctor, but I was also the most progressive thinker, and I was very much rebellious in the sense of like questioning everything, and I always saw past what my circumstance was. And so for me, once I went off to college and saw the opposite of what they were trying to kind of,
So you saw that recording studio, you was like,
the crazy thing is, so I go into a recording studio for the first time, and then the engineer was like, yo, how long have you been, in a recording studio, or what recording studio do you work out of? And I was like, I don't work, it's my first time at the studio. And he was like, yo, you are extremely natural in this space. Like, you seem very comfortable, and it seems like you've been in this space for a long time. And then I recorded my first song, and after that I was like, yo, this is what I want to do. Like, this is my thing. And then I went to Full Sail.
Full Sail was in
Orlando.
Orlando, so closer to home in some respect.
Closer to home. But even Full Sail was one of the greatest experiences because, your parents as immigrants, they're not really prepared. They tell their kids they want them to go to college, but really they ain't really prepared financially for me to go to college. So we got all these student loans, and for some reason, like after the first 6 weeks, the financial aid people was like, yo, your student loan paperwork ain't it. You know what I'm saying? So then I was like, then I filled out more paperwork, and then the loan came back again. And so they put me on, I was approaching like the financial probation thing. But then I realized that it take them about 6 to 8 weeks to find out that this loan about to be denied. So I just kept doing it until I went to class one day and my key wasn't working. And then then they were like, yo, you can't go to class. But this is actually like a real faith story for me, because every day the security guard would come and take me out of class.
Oh my God! In front of all your bro, you was getting
but I also figured out that, the instructors, my name wouldn't be on the attendance because I'm on financial probation. So I would always go at the beginning of the class like, yo, for some reason they keep messing up my name. They ain't got my name. So they make sure they wrote my name on the paper every time. And then I think it started to click that,
he bro ain't got no money.
So they for sure found out I had no bread. And then the security guard would come and take me out of class. And he was actually embarrassed for me. And I remember one day he was like, yo, man, I don't want to really have to keep doing this, but I gotta do it. Like, why are you still coming to class? I was like, yo, I came here for one reason, and you're gonna have to earn your check and come and get me out of class every single day. And every single day he came and got me out of class, but I kept all of my work. So at the end of the year, I went to the financial, to the counselor. I was like, hey, yo, so I want to figure out how to pay for my diploma. And they're like, what you mean? I was like, yo, I've been on financial probation. And they looked in the thing and they was like, nah, you haven't been enrolled since whatever. And I was like, actually, I have been. And I had all my labs. I had all my tests.
That's crazy.
And they looked at me with an egg on their face. Matter of fact, Full Sail, y'all need to give me my diploma.
Oh yeah, this is like a Full Sail campaign.
But you know, I didn't end up officially graduating, but yo, I learned how to be a recording engineer and understand how the recording atmosphere works.
That's
so
crazy.
Yeah.
And did you have like a faith moment at that time? Like, what was God like to you in that Full Sail moment, or what was your relationship with the Lord as you were trying to, like, man, because that seemed like a lot of pressure to be in another city, getting kicked out of class.
It takes a lot of faith to keep going back, knowing what's happening.
I have a very unique relationship dynamic with my faith in God. I just have a lot of faith, and it's rooted in boldness, and being very like audacious, but then also being like, y'all ain't about that for real. Like I'll take it as far as I need to take it, not because of me, but just because I really believe that God has purposed me to be here. You know, when I was younger, I was like, you know, in the hospital, and I had like this very like spiritual thing that happened that really affirmed to me that God wanted me here. You know what I'm saying? Like, I was in the hospital for weeks. I had like pneumonia, and it was like, you know, there was like witchcraft in the thing, but and so I got my deliverance from that. I'm not afraid of anything. I'm just not. You know, when you feel like God really took you out of death, then it's really hard for anybody to scare me. You know, so as a result of that, I just walk with a kind of boldness that I'm not the one to really play with, because the person who's with me is really about that as it relates to me. You know what I mean? And so that's where a lot of it is kind of rooted from.
With our guest, Sak Pase. Okay, so listen, so we want to dive into childhood a little bit. So can you talk about what your upbringing was like growing up in Fort Lauderdale, correct? What your childhood was like, upbringing, like just fondest memories you feel like that created and molded you into who you are today? Yeah,
well, I grew up in like a traditional Haitian household, which is, you know, your grandmother, she doesn't speak English, and you know, your parents are trying to figure out a way to raise their kids with these traditional, wholesome kind of cultural, like, you know, upbringing, and trying to preserve that. So I spoke Creole. Like, I speak Creole fluently because that was the primary language in the house. But then also, you know, you're also immersed in like American culture, right? Because I was born in the States. So in the house, it's Haitian all day, and then you walk out the house and it's like, yo, I'm listening to Junior Mafia, I'm listening to Mobb Deep, I'm listening to, you know, Uncle Luke. But then as soon as I get in the house, we're listening to Zouk Compa, we're listening to like Julio Iglesias, you know, Bob Marley. So there was a more international experience. It was almost like a Haitian embassy in my house.
That's crazy.
And then, you know what I mean? But you know, my dad was a pastor, you know, and he's, you know, he had like churches, and so I'd be on like the first bus to the, you know, church at 7 a.m., but then you there all day long. And then, you know what I'm saying?
That's all of us.
You know, and then you're there for Wednesday Bible, like midweek, and then Friday prayer, and then Saturday you really spending all day prepping for Sunday. But then it was very much, you know, I appreciate the fact that my parents allowed enough space for me to kind of figure out how to navigate both worlds without having to it be so lopsided.
Speaking of balance, were they the kind of parents that kept you from like mainstream culture, or sheltered, or what was their position on some of that, you know?
Yeah, well, the funny thing is, you know, for them, because they looked at the States as a place of opportunity, right? America is a place of opportunity. And so they wanted to steer me away from all of like the pitfalls that just people in my own community would fall to, which is whether it be like hustling or just like all of the things that aren't just the most savory things, right? So I was in basketball and soccer and baseball, and music was the thing that kind of just seemed to just be consistent. But like growing up, you know, one of the biggest insults, and I could never understand it because you'd go to school and then they clown Haitians all day, but they don't realize like in my household, the biggest insult was to be considered an American. So it's like, if I was like, you know, cutting up, they'd be like, yo, you acting like an American. But I looked at it as like, yo, you're not taking advantage of the opportunity that you have ahead. You know, that was their perspective. But then I also understood a lot of my friends in the community, they were just marginalized people. So to some degree, you know, the Black American experience was one of an immigrant because they don't feel like they belong here. And then here I am, you know, Haitian, and it's like I don't belong in the same community as like the American kids because they calling you all these kind of names. And so you know, the West Indian community was my community. You know what I mean? I grew up around like Jamaicans and Trini and just the Caribbean. I
think there is something powerful about the immigrant story, the first generation American story, where the drive to embrace opportunity. Not to say that Americans that are here do not have it, but the immigrant drive is just a little different, and we see that reflected in like data and like income. Talk about how you guys came here, and then over time, I'm assuming, you know, there may be some people that were in that same block that you were, or the same neighborhood, who maybe have been there for generations, and y'all come in your first generation, and you seem seemingly not surpassing, but taking advantage of the opportunities in a different way. Talk about what the immigrant drive is like that makes that a little different.
Yeah, so for me, I'm first generation, so you'd hear the stories of how, you know, your parents, what they had to do in order to just get books. You know what I mean? Like it was a privilege, like to be educated and to have books and clean, school uniforms was a big thing. So now they're looking at you as, yo, you have the privilege and the luxury to go to school. You have the privilege and luxury to have books. No, I'm just talking about like my parents within the Haitian culture, right? So they're looking at it. So when they have kids in the States, they're like, yo, how dare you not take advantage of all of these luxuries? You know what I mean? Like everything is a luxury. Everything is an opportunity meant for you to take advantage of, to put yourself in the best situation.
For sure.
And in the Haitian culture, it's like if I'm standing at a bus stop and a car jumps 2 mediums and hits me, in Haitian culture is like, it's your fault because you shouldn't have been not paying attention. You know what I mean? So there's a real sense of like accountability,
for sure,
where it's like, yo, you are responsible for your outcomes and your decisions reflect those outcomes. And so for me, it's everything is a win-win for me. There's no excuses.
I think that's powerful because when I fast forward to the things you kind of accomplished, you're probably one of the most driven people I've met and know, but you're also driven with purpose, which sometimes in music business, you get people that are driven, but the purpose part be missing. And so, I mean, you're leaving Full Sail. I mean, fast forward, you're multi-platinum producer, A&R record label, all that. But talk about the journey, bro, of like leaving Full Sail, going to LA, coming back to Atlanta, like just taking that same drive and kind of finding your way to in the music business that garnered like a lot of success. Talk about that space. I know it's a long story.
So once I left, Full Sail, I moved back to Fort Lauderdale, and I was working at this telemarketing agency. I was working at AT&T, right? So there is where I met Verse, like the introduction, when you have like the sticker and everybody raise their hands and says like, hey, I'm Sham, and then, I like to make music on my spare time. And then Verse gets up in the same room, is like, oh, yo, I like to make music too. And so then I meet Verse, and now we're, during work hours, we're talking about music the whole time. And then that evolves into like me going to his home. And it was so crazy because the first time I went to his crib, he had this like giant recording system in his living room, and he had like all of these sound modules, and I was like, oh, he's really into music. But then, I was trying to like produce beat tapes in the community to sell beat tapes, because I was like, yo, I'm starting a record company with my high school friend C's. And so, I started a record company, but I had no artists, but I just had beats. And then you find a local kid, and he's like, oh, he raps. And then, one day C's hits me, and he's like, yo, I'm on Yahoo Chat. This guy want to start a label, and he's based in LA. And he calls us and is like, hey, I'm really trying to start a record company. And he was obsessed with Murder Inc. So he just wanted to just recreate that. And he needed a producer. And I end up getting up and just moving to LA.
Crazy.
For this guy who had this dream with the record company. And then, me and Verse just worked and grinded. Right. And like Verse, Verse, but Verse is he's like a brother to me, because, he when I moved out to LA, the head of the indie label that I was working with, I was like, yo, you need a writer, and Verse is the best writer that I know. And so Verse came out to LA with just like a carry-on suitcase, and we might have written like 7-8 songs within the 4 days. And then MJ, who was running the indie label, was like, yo, if you want to stay, he can stay, but you're gonna have to cut your salary in half to give to him. And I'm like, okay, cool, it's still a win to me. And Verse never went back home, to the point that after a year, we sent for his mom to come in and stay with us.
And that's crazy. I mean, you're the music business grind. I mean, I met you like a little bit after that. Yeah. In Atlanta, working with Toronto, Rock City, and Artist Factory, and making records. And then, I mean, you always had a unique, because I mean, transparently, I was in a space where, as I started to grow in my faith, me and you connected, because I felt like there were in the industry, like being a Christian wasn't, or being a public Christian. Yeah. A one that really loves the Lord and is pursuing him. I connected with you, because I remember being in those sessions, those studio sessions, and I felt like the dominant force in those cultures, in that space, was not necessarily one that was edifying. Yeah. Not to say those were all bad people. Yeah. It was just I was like, yo, this is a kindred spirit here, and me and you just connected. And then I look up, and you had left a couple different management situations, and this didn't work out, and you always stayed focused and driven. And before you know it, you're producing for Jay-Z and Kanye West and Rihanna. Yeah. And I mean, talk about how those moments changed. And also, even as a Christian, like, for the people who don't understand how you were impactful in those spaces, talk about how that all came together, and how as a Christian, you are literally bringing a light in some of those seemingly dark spaces. Yeah.
Well, I believe that, the kingdom is a lot more expansive than the experiences that people deal with on a day-to-day basis. Sure. And to me, I think like the biggest pop star in the world is Jesus, to me, because it's the one, it's like, it's a fixture that everyone, regardless of what you believe or don't believe, it's like the most like recognizable name, right? And so I never understood why, Christians would have this box to put Jesus in, when Jesus is really like the most poppinest person, there is, right? And so I always wanted to think out. I always felt like it was bigger, right? And so I also knew that it doesn't make sense where, influence only stems from affluent people, but we're never in the room to be the influence. So I always said like, yo, for me personally, I wanted to be the best that I could be to represent my experience and my version of my faith. You know what I'm saying? And the only way that happens is if you're in a room where the most affluent and the influential people are. You know what I mean? So I carried it because you never know if you're the only Bible experience or Christ experience that somebody gets.
That's true. Whether
it be forgiveness or compassion or just having a heart, being heart forward. You just never know. And so I wore it as like, I wore the hat of, yo, you never know if this is someone's last opportunity at life or life decision or, completely changing trajectory. What if my whole purpose in existence is in this moment and I don't represent what I believe personally?
Sure.
You know what I mean? And so, and it's modeled differently, but I just feel like sometimes your life is the only Bible someone might ever get to experience, and it's a responsibility. You know what I mean? And so for me, but then I also knew my life was purposed. Like it was purpose, which means everywhere that I step foot in, I look for God to show me what the reason is. And I always believe whatever room I walk into, there's a blessing for someone. And I do my best to make sure that I leave with an empty hand when I walk out of the room, because none of this belongs to me. My life experiences, the information, the success, none of it belongs to me. And so I go in with the mentality like, yo, I have to manage this the best way that I can. But that comes with knowing that all my experiences aren't mine, whether it feels good or it tastes bitter. It's for someone else. And as a result of that, I always look for opportunities to reflect what I believe, which is patience and and passion and most importantly purpose. It was a coffee.
But you've touched so many great records. I mean, again, we'll be here too long. I've sat alongside of you on some of these records, whether that's the records we did with T.I., Nicki Minaj. I do want to talk about one of the most talk about influence and affluence. You work with arguably the most influential hip hop artists of all time. I mean, not like send a beat. Like you literally were in the room in Paris during the making of Kanye's Yeezus album.
Yeah,
which to many in the faith, there were so many complicated messaging and songs and sentiments about that record that made Christians uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But it literally was a polarizing, disruptive project. Talk about being in Paris with Ye in those rooms working on this album. And in comment section, y'all chill, okay? Go ahead, bro.
You definitely forgot to add most provocative.
Provocative is probably...
Yeah, he's a provocateur.
Yeah, the influential... the influence has downgraded to provocative at this point. We praying for you. If you ever listening.
So it was actually, I remember getting a call to go work on Yeezus in Paris, and I remember, when I touched down, you're just going through like some of the ideas that they started working on, and I remember one of them was I Am a God, and it was like so funny because, obviously, like my faith is at the center of everything. So you got this song that's like saying, "Yo, I am a God," and if I got my Bible thumping hat on, then you immediately start, "What? This is sacrilegious and blasphemous or whatever." But at that moment, I remember sitting down. I was just asking Holy Spirit, "Yo, to just like lead me to not respond and react out of my own personal ego, trying to like tell this man that he tripping, because I think there's always an opportunity for God to reveal to you your plan if you allow his reasoning for putting you in the room to lead. And so at that point, I just felt like the Holy Spirit was like, yo, you're not here for that. You're here to be in the room, because it wasn't about him. It was about everyone else that was in the room. All the other people that you might meet that you could potentially be a safe space for.
Sure.
to offer a sense of peace.
Sure.
And I developed like amazing relationship. That's when I met Travis Scott for the first time, and sitting down and talking to him, and getting the opportunity to just impart these words.
Sure.
And like getting to know him while he was on his road to discovery.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So like imagine if I was in there trying to like, I rebuke thee in the name, and it's like, yo, bro, we just want to know if these drums is right.
Sure.
Like you
were here to work.
I was here to serve a purpose. I think you have to be sensitive to to be spirit led, so you don't go in thinking it's your job to like convert everybody in the room. Because at the end of the day, I'm not the one converting anybody. I'm not the one preaching to anybody. It should always be spirit led and driven. You know what I mean?
think Propaganda, shout out Prop, who he dropped an op-ed about that song in the height of the blog era 2014, 2013, and everybody was chiming in, all the Christian media, about how that song was so polarizing, which of course it did make you like, what the. He wrote an op-ed called "I Am a Kanye," meaning Ye's saying it. We are doing the same thing, just not expressing it verbally.
Yeah.
So while Ye is, in some regards, saying "I am a God," which is very problematic, we're not saying it, but we're acting like we're God, and the life that we live and the things that we do.
Yeah, but I also think that if you go to scripture, it might have been more digestible if he says, "I am in his likeness," or "I am created in his image." Then it would have been a lot more like, palatable.
Sure.
But the truth is, like Christ was disruptive. You know what I'm saying? Like he said things that had everybody in an uproar. So though, the language and the perspective on like the human level might have been a disconnect, the truth is when I sit down and I'm having Bible study with my kids, the first thing that I'm leading with is you're created in God's likeness, which means that you are who he says you are.
Facts.
And if any got a problem, and I tell them, if anybody has a problem with who God says you are, that's their business.
And I love that, because to get on a hot take, we in Christian culture, the gospel message too much starts with the fall of man. And it needs to start with the creation of the earth and then God creating us in his image first.
Yeah.
He created us, loved us, and then we fell.
Exactly.
We didn't fall.
So we didn't start at the fall.
We didn't start at the fall. We are made in Christ's
image first.
That's the first. That's the primary foundation. I think I've seen a lot of people their doctrine starts at the fall.
Yeah, and it's what it does is it creates this identity dynamic where it's like you start off like, yo, I'm not worthy. And it's like, nah, I mean, at least for me and how I'm raising my kids and how I've been able to overcome a lot of things in the music business where they're constantly looking to place their definitions of who you are and condition you to look at yourself the way they want to see you. You know what I mean?
For sure.
So, I'm created in his likeness and image, Amen. Which is I'm empowered. I'm wonderfully made. Mm-hmm. I'm very much purposed. There's a reason for my existence. And it also means don't play with God's child as well. And because I think there's this everybody got this kumbaya moment, lens of God, which is true. But God was really on that. So many different examples.
For sure.
Someone's prayer or someone's, just an ounce of redeemable anything is why God didn't lay everybody down. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? And so I don't look at God through a lens of this kumbaya. I also look at it hey, yo, listen, God does not play about his sheep and his church. And that's an identity thing. If we looked at, our purpose and our callings as firm and as proactive and aggressive as the person who, wrote it all down, then I also think that we'd be a lot more bold, and we wouldn't, like this whole meek, weak, like last, overcome is like, nah, they're like, you're supposed to slam dunk everything. You're supposed to walk in and be bold. You're supposed to know that, I'm here in God's name. I'm purpose, like I'm ordained to be here. And that would, to me, that would penetrate at rooms and rooms of influence where we're supposed to be the boldest person and the most confident person, not because of us, but the person who walked in the door with us, or actually who walked in the room before us.
There you go.
You feel what I'm saying? So
perfect. Well said, bro.
So well said.
Man, we gotta go through these songs.
Yeah.
We got so many to go. We got
so many.
Shout out. By the way, New Slave is one of my favorite records on there on Yeezus album that you worked on. So, but let's talk about this record that I think changed my life in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Changed this building's trajectory. The well-known Coming In Hot.
Yeah.
Talk about
the little engine that still keeps going.
That song gets synced like every week. Let's talk just quick couple words about that song and how it came about and how what it's meant for you.
It's actually, to me, it's God's like biggest like comedy punchline in my life. Because after you get all these successes, you create these kind of personal expectations. To some degree, you probably even start creating mantles and things that your heart is focused on, right? Mm-hmm. And I went through this period where, I had just got married. I'm getting ready to have my daughter, and I want to be like the guy that I would, green light my daughter be walking in with. So, there's all these identity things, and then I just got burnt off the music business. I started like investing, and I thought that was more like, it was way more fun, but that's mainly about like bread, like money, and not really purpose. And I got into this weird space, and so I used to just go to the studio to just like, stay close to the thing that, brought me joy. But at the time, it wasn't really bringing me joy because I felt like music was just super linear. I wasn't sure where my footing was. And I would just go to the studio, and then, I made Coming In Hot out of like a mockery, because I was like, I'm like, yo, bet they would like this sound and that sound. And I started constructing it because of me focusing on syncs. And so I was just like, oh, add this sound, this cheesy sound, and then I'm gonna make this and that. And so I remember you called me and was like, yo, we working on this Andy, album. Can you send me like, 10 beats? And I was like, well, I got some joints. Like I got some records that I think are incredible beats. And then you called me back, was like, and then also send me something that you hate, that you don't think is good at all. And then I was like, oh, I had just made that. I was like, yeah, this is like the wackest beat I've made ever. Like, and I made it to be like whack. You know what I mean? And then when you call me, it's like, yo, there's something in that pack that you did that's amazing. There was like a couple beats where it was like, oh, I know exactly which one. It gotta be this. And when I texted you, is it this, is that? And he was like, nah. And when you sent me that beat, I was so annoyed because I was like,
crazy.
Yo, the pack I sent was so crazy. But then it also was God being like, you know nothing. Mm-hmm. Like your job is just to be present and create. It's not your job to A&R yourself or to think that you know what's gonna be what. And so when that song started going crazy, I just felt like it was God pointing and laughing at me and letting me know, like, bro, you don't know anything. Like you don't know anything. And so that changed, that hit a reset button, because I started having fun again, because it was fun out of the fact like, yo, what I don't like, it has nothing to do with me. It's like what I like and don't like is none of my business. And that's when I started getting into art, because I started realizing, like, you go to these art galleries and you look at this painting and the creator does not care that you paid $50 to enter this museum. Like, he just was there to express himself and get, you know, just be a vessel. And that song, every time it gets licensed and synced, it's just, I feel like it's just God laughing at me like, look, it's still cutting checks.
That's
you know
amazing.
what I mean?
And I think the camaraderie of who's on that record, like, I mean, from everybody on that record who has a part of the songwriting and publishing, all from the faith. It was all group of godly men.
Yeah, it's been one of the most unique blessings because it was you know, I was getting so much work that I started, you know, this production company and this publishing venture because I didn't want to start turning down work during the height, you know, getting all this work, which is why I was like, yo, Ace, let's collaborate, you know what I mean? And we went through our years of working, and we've done like all of these amazing records together. But then you became, you know, a record executive, and you called me about, you know, my gifts and talent. And to me, it was such a perfect example of when you pour into people, it will come back to you when you're in service to the person. So there was the first time where all this energy that I put into the music business, you kind of don't ever get anything back. But this is the first time where I showed a lot of love to someone in the music business, and it came back. And not only did it come back, there's no expiration on God's blessing. And so like this song is just this recurring like blessing and like a huge meme joke on me too.
Shoot, I know you had a.
No, that's real. With all the work that you've done, I was looking through. You made a post one time and talking about service, and you tapped on it a little bit just now, just saying how what you said was, don't let anyone make you feel like there's no reward in being a service to others. And I can only imagine with being in the music industry where it's like people may take so much where they may not find value in that. I just wanted you to kind of share that perspective, just because I feel like that could be really fruitful for people to hear.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there was this, I remember this one day I was at a recording studio in Atlanta, and I was the only one in the studio, and this guy comes in and he was looking for someone, and that person wasn't there. And so he was kind of hanging around. And I was like, yo, I'm about to go to Bible study. The person you're looking for ain't gonna be here. I can't have you sitting here. Do you want to go to church with me? And he's like, yeah. So we're in the car. I'm in the car with a stranger. This is before Uber too. So it's like, I'm in the car with a stranger. We're not really talking, and we end up at church. And literally he gives his life to Christ. And he's like, yo, bro, I've been a practicing Muslim my whole life, and my mother's been praying for me to come to Christ. And I'm like, whoa, this is crazy. And then I'm like, yeah, I'm about to go back home though, you know what I mean? And so like, but in that moment I realized that what I think my reasoning of being in the music business, a lot of us think it's for our hands, but it's really for our service, right? And so when, you know, I remember the first time I got, you know, it was inquired for me to be a A&R, I struggled with it because I was like, yo, I want a number one as a producer. And I felt like I was quitting on producing. And my wife was like, nah, you're looking at it the wrong way. Instead of producing a song, you'll be looking to produce an outcome and an environment. And at that point, I realized that if I switched my perspective and intentionally showed up to service the room, then that's what I'm there for. So when I went in to become an A&R Empire, it was solely to service the room, service the office, service the person sitting next to me, more importantly, service the artist, because I felt like there was this huge disconnect between being a producer on the outside and then all of a sudden your song dies on the inside. But then there were so many artists who used to come on my couch and ask for advice on a myriad of things. And I was like, and you know, some good friend of mine, Stan and Edith, they were like, yo, I think you would be like a great like record, like a A&R executive, or just executive in general, because of like your heart, but then also what you know. And I went into Empire just wanting to service as many people, as many rooms as possible. And I got assigned Boozy in 2023. He had already been signed there for like a couple years, and I guess it just wasn't clicking. He was always talented, but it just wasn't clicking for some reason. And I remember, Tina assigned, was like, yo, he's been signed, but hasn't figured it out. Like, go in and see what you can do. And I remember the first day I met him, he played me his album, and I was like, this ain't it. I felt like he was trying to split himself to appease, these cultures. The culture that he's supposed to be associated with is like, he's 6'4" with Wicks, he from the South. He's supposed to be like this super rapper, right? But in his songs, there was this one song called Annabelle, it was a demo version all the way at the bottom of the sound playlist, the SoundCloud link. I was like, bro, this is the album right here. Because I met a guy like him before, world builder, disruptive, very thoughtful, introspective, but more importantly, had more inside, and the struggle was trying to figure out how to get it out. And it was like he at that time, he had these like similarities with like Ye, in a sense of like, he had so much bottled up that he wanted to get out. I was like, yo, this isn't the album. Annabelle is the album. Like, I see you bigger than you see yourself. And I just wanted to reassure him that he wasn't crazy for believing that he should be at top 40, and I do believe that, it was timing, because we were sitting in a room where like, you got plaques on the wall. And it's so funny, I never ever wanted to put plaques on the wall, but a friend of mine was like, yo, don't put them up for you, put them up for the people who aspire to get there. And we was at my studio, and I do believe that because I had spent so much time succeeding with the biggest artists in the world, I also became someone who can recognize these very special things. And it was my job to figure out how to help him rediscover who he is and what he is. And so I just projected and spoke life every chance that I could, because regardless of what his circumstance was, where he's at now, I saw it on the first day. I just knew it. And I always feel like God's never lied to me. And he's blessed me with having these specific instincts on recognizing things, even though sometimes it might be 4 years ahead of its time, right? But I was there to, remind him and rediscover how brilliant he was, how special he was, how he didn't need anything, how everything that he actually needed was already in him, and he's just got to believe. And I just handed him the keys to my studio. And, I set up sessions not necessarily to get songs out of them. I remember I put him in this one session, and he like freestyled the whole song. And all the writers were in the room like, bro, you don't need us to be here. And he was like, really? He's like, everyone's like, dog, you're like amazing. And I wanted him to hear someone other than me, because he also thought like, yo, Sak, you kind of extra. Like, you kind of like extra with how big. I was like, yo, you're the cover of GQ. That's how your mentality needs to think, because I saw it for him.
That's crazy.
And other people started reaffirming these things. And so I just gave him the keys to my studio, and I just believed in him. And every chance that I got, I just reassured him like, yo, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And, for me, it was in the service of his dream, of his purpose, of his brilliance is what I was there for. It wasn't for me to try to produce no songs for him. You know what I mean? Because he was already talented. I didn't help him become more talented. I felt like it was my job to clear the runway so he can see that he's exactly who he believes himself to be.
That's
which is
amazing.
who God always intended him to be. You know what I mean? And so he's living out, you know, the heavenly reflection of what he was always created to be. You know what I mean? And so for me, you know, it was the biggest lesson in my career, because my entire career I would leave home and tell my wife, like, yo, I'm on my way to do the work that's gonna get me a number one. But we ended up getting exactly what I've always felt was there in service to someone else. So it was one of the most redeeming, you know, experience of my career. It's definitely, it just reaffirmed who God was and made me, you know, cement that, like, bro, you're not tripping. You just got to be a lot more confident in the promises that God gave me, but then also be flexible enough to realize it ain't gonna look how you think it's gonna look.
For sure, and that's the faith that I think people can take away from. And I just want to, you know, end here and say, man, your service to the music industry, to me, to all the artists you work with, is a gift. It's a gift. It's a legacy, and we celebrate you here at Reach Records. Just for the ways you've served us with your gifts, man. And I feel like your story's still being written.